So now that Scott has showed me how to do some bipolar flaking, he's going to show me a little bit more advanced techniques. So what do you got for us, Scott?
Well, we have some percussion flaking coming up. And percussion is taking a rock and hitting another rock with it. Now,
But a different type of rock
type
hitting.
of the rock. We don't have an anvil stone to help us out here with this one. We're just going to use the hammer stone from our bipolar work there to strike this piece of chert. This is coastal plain chert from the Flint River down in southwestern Georgia. And we're going to use this to make some flakes by percussion flaking. And with a hammer stone, we're going to hit it and knock off some bigger, more predictable flakes, we hope, anyway.
Now, Scott, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You said chert from the Flint River, and I know people have heard Flint before,
Right.
but they may not have heard chert. So what's the difference here between these two rocks?
Well, it's somewhat semantic and it is somewhat qualitative in that some people would call a really pretty flinty rock that's very glassy, like this is the better quality of this material. Some folks might refer to that as a flint, but you're always okay to call it chert, but some people might fuss at you if you were to call it flint. And this is a slightly grainier version than this, so it is, some of the geology people would refer to that as being more cherty than this. So there's any number of materials that kind of qualify in that cherty realm of things. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have to use a little bit of geometry for this. Bipolar flaking focuses mainly on keeping the rock stable and upright while you hit it so you don't injure yourself and that you split the rock into usable pieces. Percussion flaking relies a little bit more on some unusual geometries that people are not familiar with, that you would think if you wanted to knock a chunk off. Let's say we wanted to remove a flake down here, we would, you might think like driving a nail with a hammer, we have to hit in the direction that we want the flake to be removed. But what we really want to do is come down on the edge at about a 45-degree angle. And that will give us a flake that will follow that ridge back through here. So let me take the hammer stone for a minute and remove a flake right there. So that's what we were sort of after. This one has some steep edges like we talked about earlier there, so you could use that for working hard materials, but that could also be a projectile point inside this piece. This is good enough material that with a little bifacial work, trimming and edging, we could make a projectile point or arrowhead, some people would call it, sort of where that one's headed to.
So in a sense, this is sort of like, an artist making a sculpture.
It
just
is,
to sort of
very
envision what the material can be before you start whacking away.
Yeah, you have to have sort of a little bit of an abstract idea and look at this stuff and go, yeah, I want this flake to look like this and it needs to come off here. It's much more predictable than a lot of people seem to think that it is. So that's got a really good edge right there.
Look at that.
A little jagged because of the coarseness of the raw material, but if you were to look at that right there, you'd be able to skin an animal or saw into a piece of wood, any number of things with that piece.
That looks almost as sharp as my pocket knife.
It is, and it probably actually is, just about.
Just about, okay.
Stone tools are very, very effective. So let's take this piece, and it's also important to not put your hand on the sharpest part back here, but I'm going to open this up over here. Yay. Well, then it falls apart, and you hope you don't slice your hand open. This method of quartering when you're holding it in your lap is sometimes a little iffy, which I'll throw in just tangentially that a lot of what we know about, or a lot of the practice of modern flint knapping derives from the gun flint industry of the last few centuries. That all this sitting around on some sort of a bench with a pad on your leg. If you look at the Brandon flint knappers in England, historically, this is almost exactly how they did it. But I'm just trying to get into some good material here and get away from this chalky stuff. That's not what you want. You want the prettiest of what's in this piece of flinty rock. So I think what we will need to do is come over here. Okay, more rind, more cortex there. Well, I tell you what, I didn't get the best piece of chert that I owned, I guess, did I? Wow. But I think it'll do for our purposes.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Now, I'm going to give this to you.
Oh, okay.
And what we want to do, again, is tip that down.
Tip it down.
You want to hit a little back off the edge. That's a little bit too thick for most things there, but you get some idea here how far off the edge you need to hit in order to grab that rock enough and powerfully enough to detach a potentially usable flake. So take the hammerstone, hold it loosely, tip that down.
Okay.
And then start, if you have a ridge, such as that one right there, or even over here, even though it goes back kind of in the wrong direction, if you hit that, the energy is going to try to follow that ridge.
It's going to, it's going to go down through here.
And probably terminate down there somewhere. So tip that up at about 45.
Okay.
Take a swat at it, see what happens.
So when you say this all involves geometry, you know, when I look at this rock, there's a lot of complex geometry going on.
There is, yeah.
So in your mind, what you're thinking is, you know, I've got to look at this rock and understand where it's going to break, where the prediction of that energy is going to travel through.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not a random process. You know, once you understand the angles and the geometry, it becomes a little clearer what you're after.
Okay, so I'm going to hit right about
Try
there.
that one, yeah.
About at this angle.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm coming down like this or straight down.
I'm going to recommend that you hold the hammerstone kind of from the sides and don't do that.
Okay.
When you're striking, as you probably saw me doing a moment ago, when you hit, you need to have a little bit of follow through. You notice it bouncing on your leg, and you don't want to be putting the brakes on as you arrive at the rock. You want to kind of punch it through, and then you can put the brakes on or let it bounce off your leg pad.
Sort of like throwing a baseball.
Right, just like driving a nail with a hammer or throwing a baseball or anything else.
All right, here I go.
Give it a
So
shot.
I'm gonna watch it.
All right.
Okay.
Whoa. Something came off.
So yeah,
All right.
look at that.
A razor
that's
blade.
really thin.
Yeah. Good. That's one of those thin tools there. So
Okay.
give it another hit.
Okay, here we go again. So I'm gonna not hold that one.
Hang on. I think we may have.
What?
You broke my rock. Yeah.
Sorry.
Hey,
Get
that's
some
what we're
glue.
for. I tell you what. Let's. We have a pretty solid piece right in here.
Okay.
Do this. Do the same thing, but hit that chalky stuff right
This
there. And just
chalky?
get rid of it. There you go. All right.
Okay,
There we go.
there we go.
Now get
Little
some more of
bit.
the chalky stuff off. Okay, slow down.
Oh,
Yeah. Slow down. Just.
I got excited there.
I know.
It's real fun.
This is exciting. It's good to just kind of regroup yourself after
Okay.
every strike.
All right.
It's going to go, okay, let me, hit this, think, hit,
Okay. This is a thinking man's.
It's a thinking man's game. Yeah,
Okay.
this is not checkers. This is chess.
All right.
There you go.
see.
There you go.
Oh, there
Did
we
it. Okay.
All right.
Now you
Look
got
at
a good
that.
little chunk there. That would be good for. You could make something out of this. You could use it as a tool, or you could turn it into a little core, a little prehistoric razor blade dispenser that you could knock small tools off of for all kinds of things. In the meantime, though, I think we've done a good job with that. Let's find the flattest spot here.
Okay.
Now, something I just wanted you to get into this for a few minutes, and hit a few rocks. Generally, when you are flint knapping, that is the name for this craft, you want to grind the edges off so that you don't just shatter them. However, sometimes those edges of the chunk you're working on can be important in and of themselves, because if you were working hard materials, you can take a flint flake and work like this. And this is sort of traditionally how we archaeologists interpret stone tool use. But I really like the idea of stationary tools. It's the difference between a hand plane and a modern power planer joiner, that when I'm working materials, look how much more effective that is right there. So sometimes the chunk you're working on becomes almost a better tool when you leave these sharp edges on there. I mentioned that just sort of as an addition to talking about grinding that, but I would take your hammerstone and use it as sort of an expedient grinder. I hate doing that to a beautiful edge like that, but sometimes you got to break a rock. And before you hit it again, that makes that edge sturdier, so you don't have to hit so far back on it to get a bite on it with a hammerstone.
So I'm grinding it a little bit.
Grind it in about 45 degrees. Hit it
45
again.
degrees. Right
See what
there.
happens.
2 fingers, or not
Yep.
2 fingers,
Just loosely.
loosely.
All right, that sounded good. Yeah, a little
It's a
ochre look. You know, it's a usable flake.
And I got a...
Hit it again. Now you got a ridge, yeah.
I got a ridge. All right, I'm gonna go back a little bit, 45 degree. Oh, look.
All right.
Oh, almost.
Now tap lightly. There you go.
Wow.
All right. Hit some more.
Sips hit. Oh, we're gonna do some more. All right.
Now grind it before you hit it. Another thing that really helps when you're doing any kind of percussion flaking, you know, we're beginning to get a little bit of a concavity in here. And flakes do not like a concavity. They work somewhat better when you are taking them off of a convex edge. So I think what we might want to do, let me hit this again.
Sure.
See what we've got left in this baby. This is also a very hard hammerstone, and people often think that they need the hardest possible hammerstone to create stone tools. Reality is that a lot of times I like to use a softer rock because it gives you more control over the process. So a lot of times I'll take a softer hammer, especially for later stage things, like say when you're getting ready to produce a bifacial tool, like a projectile point, you can use that. I can see a crack over here, so we're going to get rid of that crack. So take that and just use that. Now we're going to go much smaller. Just try to take a few flakes around there with the softer hammer and see how you like that.
So this is like before when you said you had this little ridge over here.
Right.
And I want to strike it somewhere right around there, 45 degree angle.
Yep.
This softer.
Same thing, just softer. Finesse.
All right, let's see if I can finesse this.
There you go.
Oh.
It's a nice flake. Good flake morphology. Bulb of percussion. Your platform right here where you struck it, you know, and that bulb flattens out, and even though we've got a lot of chalky stuff at the distal end right there, that is a good example of flake trimming off that rind off the outside right there, and some usable edge on it too.
So you know, when you're talking about that bulb of percussion, that's that giant wave of energy that's traveling.
It is. This is our leftover Hertzian cone in here. And again, sometimes you can waste a lot of time talking about the physics, but sometimes you just gotta hit a rock, you know. But yeah, putting things back together, I encourage people with all kinds of flaking methods to stick things back together and see what they did sometimes, because that tells you, it informs what you were doing. So hit another time or two.
All right, let's see.
We'll move on to. Okay.
All right, I think I'm learning here. We've got a little bit of a convex over here. Can I hit it right there?
I would hit it right there.
Right there. All right, here we go.
No, lay it down and hit it right there.
Right, okay.
Making razor blades.
Oh, there goes. Whoa! Right. Look at that one.
And
now this is something that I'm used to seeing, you know, on archaeological sites, and we've created a lot of material here, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, people in the past didn't necessarily pick all this stuff. Sometimes they'd sweep it away, but right.
Right, and this is all sort of exemplified. This material is very much like the things you would find on a quarry site, where people take a raw chunk. You know, we have pickup trucks and all kinds of appurtenances these days. We can bring rocks home in all kinds of forms, but in the past when you were traveling on foot, you would go to that quarry site and you would reduce what might be a second-rate rock down to its best pieces, or even just find a brand new rock, make things that have lots of known good material in them so that they're more portable, put them in your pack basket and take them away from that site, and you sort of get this filtering out of the worst material up to a better grade of material further away from that quarry site. So they're curating this material quite carefully. But yeah, that's a good looking flake there.
That's my flake.
Awesome. So, well, I think we're ready to move on to pressure flaking.
Let's do it.
All right.